Okay.
Okay, all in favor of approving the minutes? Any noes? Any abstentions?
I was absent.
Abstention.
Okay, thanks.
Great. And City Foresters report.
Good morning, commissioners. Great to see you today. As you might expect, I will start my report about budget. City Council yesterday approved the mayor's budget, which included $65 million over 5 years from Portland Clean Energy Funds for the city urban forestry to begin to assume responsibility for street tree maintenance. As you all likely recall, the request that had been made for those PSEF funds was 100 million instead over 5 years. So instead of receiving the 100 million, we will be receiving 65 million over 5 years, and the remaining 35 million over 5 years of PSEF funds is being used to replace existing urban forestry general fund budget. In effect, this significantly reduces current funding for the city to assume responsibility for street tree maintenance. There's been fiscal tension around Portland Clean Energy Fund's use, and there are significant general fund gaps in the city budgets that City Council has been wrestling with. Those general fund gaps, according to the city budget office, have been caused by reduced tax revenue, primarily from decreased downtown property values. In effect, this change to our PSEF funding frees up, so to speak, general fund for the city, which can be used much more broadly than PSEF funds, which have more specific required uses. While it's unfortunate to currently not have full funding to assume responsibility for street tree maintenance, Parks and Urban Forestry are pleased to have been working really closely with Bureau of Planning and Sustainability for years now to identify and deliver together parks and urban forestry services that support PSEF and to be able to support other needed city services. So we will, in effect, as of July 1st, have $13 million per year to fund the street tree maintenance program development. That's not enough to implement that program as planned. However, Portland Clean Energy Funds are expected to continue, and support for the city assuming responsibility for street tree maintenance has been strong, including by the PSEF Advisory Committee, who, similar to you folks, advises the city on how those PSEF funds should be used. So we anticipate and plan to be requesting the remaining funds that are needed to fully implement street tree maintenance in the future, probably in the next 1 to 3 years. In the meantime, in July, when the current funds become available, we'll begin creating and recruiting and hiring people to develop the new street tree maintenance program. And that program development, so brand new program, never been done before in Portland. We have some work to do, exciting work to do, creating how that will work and what it will look like. And reminder, there is the work online that we did with a consultant in the past few years on how that might work. So we have some good guidance there. But that program development and ramp up will take time and requires less funding than operating the full established program. So the impacts of not receiving that 35 million in PSEF funds should be felt mostly later, and in the short term, not hinder us from going ahead and building the program we all want to see. Meantime, PSEF has been making a really big impact on climate action focused on and with centered communities in Portland. And I had the opportunity to see the council work session that PSEF did on Tuesday morning. So if you all are interested in hearing kind of the culmination of what's been going on in the PSEF world and how those funds have been used and that discussion at council, I'll recommend that you watch that work session. The video is online. Okay, my next item is an update on the urban forest plan. This is from Belinda Udelman, our lead for that project. On April 24th, we hosted a successful family-friendly open house, and there were at least 70 or 80 participants. And some of the other team members who do open houses frequently said they were really impressed with the turnout. That's more folks than they usually see at Parks Many open houses. So that's really encouraging to hear. And thanks to those of you who were there, such as Bruce. On May 2nd, the community survey period closed. Right now, the project team is analyzing those results. So excited to see what we learned from that. Project team is also meeting with the Community Advisory Committee and Technical Advisory Committee currently to identify priorities for the plan vision and goals. They're also wrapping up a review of peer, city, and industry practices for setting tree canopy targets. They are meeting with the Technical Advisory Committee in the coming weeks to review draft vision and goals and begin discussions about canopy targets with them. And finally, the project manager will come back to the Forestry Commission in June to share a summary of that community input and present the draft vision and goals for urban forestry's review and discussion. My third and final item for today is noting that today's agenda includes a training prepared and presented for you all by the Portland Parks and Recreation Equity and Inclusion team, specifically John Tapero, one of those team members. They are a small but mighty team in parks. I appreciate John making time for you all today and having worked with Brian to create a training that's tailored to your role and needs to some degree. And I wanted to give you a little introduction to that training. The training is on the Parks and Recreation Equity and Anti-Racism lens. That lens is a set of guiding principles that park staff use to create more equitable outcomes for all communities. So applying an equity lens like this one that Parks created helps center the people who are most impacted by systemic racism and inequities. All urban forestry staff engage in a similar training to what you'll have today. And urban forestry's managers, supervisors, and teams work to apply the tool and the training that they've had ongoing to improve our services to Portlanders. We asked John to bring it to you today so that the Urban Forestry Commission can use the tool in a similar way, advising the city on policies involving trees. So this should help you all hopefully think about how policies affect centered communities and advise us on what we should do better, differently, or the same. That concludes my report. If anyone has any questions, I'd be happy to try to answer.
Any questions? Commissioners' thoughts?
I have a question. City Forester Cairo, you have $13 million this year, or rather that would be starting in July. How long is your ramp up period expected to be?
Yeah, in the consultant work that we did with Davie Resource Group, we anticipated it taking as much as 5 years. We're going to try to make it as quick as we can because we know everyone, including us, wants to see implementation and on the ground results as quickly as possible.
Yeah.
So I would say at minimum, Casey, given the current funding, it would take us 3 years, but it could take more. And we will be learning along the way. That's one of the advantages of having a ramp up. It gives us some space to really see how things are playing out, what staffing needs really are, how resources can be used. And you all will be kept apprised, of course, of how that goes.
So do you plan to spend $13 million between July 2024 and July 2025?
Yeah, we probably will not be able to spend that much then. That is anticipated. It's the way that the city budgets work. They don't break it down into like annual units. They're doing it. We do. There's an annual budget, but it's not when there's a new funding for a program. It's done in lumps like this. And PSEF has specifically been doing the 5-year lumps. So unlikely that we'll spend 13 million in the first year. That's okay. We'll go as fast as we can, but we also want to make sure it's the right program.
Yeah.
Yeah. We are also, because I know this is going to be a question someone will have. We are also looking at how we can show the outcomes and the services that people want to see from those funds as quickly as possible. We have some thoughts on how we can do that, even while we're still, trying to get the people to do the work.
Excellent. That was honestly my point, or what I wanted to suggest to you, which I'm glad you brought up, because I figured you'd said it or already thought about it. But I think it would be really important to have visual effects seen as quickly as possible. So whether that is buying a new set of trucks and gear and saying, put it on the side of it, this is bought and it's doing this work. So as it drives by, people can see it and know what's happening. Even if that's just the very first thing you do, and get it in front of people. I think that'll be important to show while you're ramping up, even if it's one crew doing a small amount of work everywhere around the city. I think that visual sign to the city would be really important to show that we are actively doing it, whether or not it's just this little tiny kind of section. So I'm glad you thought about that, and I want to encourage that's what you do.
Thank you, Commissioner Clapp. Well said, received, and you bet. And if commissioners have other ideas on what they think would be impactful and meaningful manifestations of using these funds the way they're supposed to be used, we'd love to hear them. And not necessarily today, it could be send an email, or we can have a future agenda.
Just to piggyback on what Casey said, 'cause I totally agree. Oh, sorry, Bruce. I also think it's great to let the public know about ramping up how the funds are spent, because I think something we've seen with the county is people are really frustrated because there's all this unspent money, but what hasn't been well communicated is it takes time to staff up. It takes that pipeline of workers, doesn't just come overnight. So I think being upfront about communicating that probably will also be helpful.
Thank you. Absolutely. Great point. And I'm glad that commissioners are recognizing. It's new work requires new people to do it.
Yes.
Um,
And they don't just magically appear in front of you.
We're not growing them in the nursery, right?
Yeah, exactly. And I'll add that that's not just on the staff side, it's on the contractor side. Well, it's supposed to be tree provided contractors doing this tree maintenance. What we heard from our consultant is there does not exist this latent supply of work of capacity. So what typically happens is the contractors get the contract and they go out for financing, and then they hire the staff to do it and purchase the vehicles. So like they have on-ramp as well. They don't, this is pruning, inspecting 30,000 trees a year. Like those workers aren't just sitting there not doing work right now. So like there's ramp up on the city side and on the contractor side too.
Like during the storms, people came from outside of Portland to help, right? Like people will
That's
travel.
happened in the past, yeah.
It has happened. This storm, we didn't use outside folks as contractors, but there certainly were folks working in town who were not usually based here.
Commissioner Nielsen.
Two questions. The 13 million a year, if you don't use it, does it carry over or do you lose it for that particular? That's the one question. The other question is, where are we at in the request for funding for the apprenticeship program, or I'm not sure if that's what you call it, but I think it was 700,000 or something like that.
Oh, yeah.
I can speak to that.
Yeah.
Talk about budget.
Yeah, on the first answer, I'm not sure with, typically in the city, if you don't spend it, it does not carry forward. There are some exceptions to that, there's process for it. But typically it does not. PSEP is managed a little bit differently. It's been allocated as sort of lump sums that you then draw down over the period of the allocation. So that could work a little bit differently, but I don't want to get out ahead of exactly how the city budget office is gonna handle that. So I would assume it would not roll over as this sort of annual allocation, but PSEP has been managed a little bit differently at times, so.
Thanks, Brian. And recall folks that we're already doing equitable tree canopy from PSEF. And our experience is that, as Brian described, it's not a use it or lose it, that it gets rolled forward. And that has been anticipated throughout designing equitable tree canopy. Regarding the arborist trainee program, we unfortunately and frustratingly have been a little bit hung up with the Bureau of Human Resources. There are how to make this not too bureaucratic. The city has any position that a city employee is in has a classification behind it. And there are some old errors in the arborist trainee classification. And we've been trying to get those corrected with Bureau of Human Resources, and for various labor relations and equity across different city trainee program reasons, that has been difficult. As of last week, we think that we internally have found a way to do it within the existing classification, even though it is not entirely what the classification should be. And we have been working with partner programs to set up networks for recruitment for the trainee positions when we are ready to post them. We've also been developing and mostly finished developing both a technical and a workforce development support training program in detail for the trainees that we will continue to work on when they're in place, and we will be modifying to use with other trainee or trainee type classifications going forward. I aspire someday to have tree inspector trainees, for example, and this program will benefit them.
Thank you.
We also have a few folks currently working with us who are interested in the trainee program, who would be really add to and improve our team in the ways we're looking for the trainees. Thanks for asking.
Any other questions, commissioners? I had a couple. One was kind of playing off of what Bruce asked. So the 65 million total is still at risk, or what's your feeling about that? I realize this is sort of new ground.
Right.
I mean, the 13 million, if we don't spend it all, may not carry over, but what about the total for the 5 years? Any insight into that?
We don't have any special reason to believe it's at risk. That
Yeah.
said, this is all up to city council,
Right.
and there's a lot going on at council with form of government and a lot of reorganization happening within the city, and also elections coming. We have mostly been watching to see what the outcomes are. And that 13 million a year, just to be clear, we don't think that's really at risk, but in and of itself, we do think it'll roll over. But that in sum is the 65 million, which it should be okay, but we can't say that with certainty, out of our control.
Yeah. And then the other question was, so this is, a very exciting, long story, and I'm sure we'll be hearing about this repetitively, the maintenance program that you're building. But what are the other, besides staffing, what are the other really big categories that you're thinking about?
With those funds?
Yeah.
Yes. Well, staffing is across the board, right, for all types of program areas. The other biggest cost is really contractors, as Brian mentioned, the actual tree work. Our plan is not to have city staff doing that, rather contractors. And hopefully we'll be getting some co-bid and emerging small business women and minority owned contractors involved there too, which is a PSEF goal as well as ours. And we've been making good headway in that regard with planting contractors already. So that's hopeful. That's really, there's some kind of internal infrastructure costs like fleet and workspace. Those are not as significant as the contractors, that's the bulk of the work. The staff will be developing the contracting system, running procurements, and then working with the contractors to deliver the work and oversee the contractors, as well as staff working on communications, some dedicated education and communication resources that we have not had before. And that's been a point of discussion in this room many times, so I'm happy to report that. We are also looking at reducing or eliminating permit fees for non-development processes. And we are also, some with these funds, but really with other already existent PSEF funds, looking at private property tree maintenance support. That is, as Brian can attest, because he's very close to the urban forest plan project, that has been strong feedback from participants, that is a burden and barrier. Those are some of the highlights. Do you have anything you want to add or clarify?
I think just highlighting the real need for communication and education. It's like a new service that kind of touches everyone. And also there's a real customer service component as well. We expect, 823 gets a lot of emails already. This is a whole new service. And so I think that we're expecting to kind of like rethink what that staffing program looks like for the customer service, 823 Tree. We're already acquiring software to support that, so we've got a few things in motion to ramp up for that. I think people are gonna have a lot of questions when they hear this is available to them. So I think really thinking strategically what that looks like.
Yeah, because in addition to what Casey said about like early startup and showing us, it seems like, from some of the things that we've heard in our work with you that, a showy support, particularly potentially of a part of town or subgroup that's been underserved, would be a big plus. Exactly how to do that, I think is probably tricky, so it'd be interesting to hear more about it in the future. Yeah.
We will of course be sharing information and discussing it, wanting feedback from you all as it all goes. I want to just go back to the software because it's so important. We finally have approval to contract with a vendor for the software that we've always needed, or we hope is the software we've always needed. A real tree asset management workflow software system. We've never had that. So for example, looking at a tree in the park right outside the window, we do not have software that tells us what's been done to that tree, by whom, when. What we have is bits and pieces of information spread across different resources. This is essential for street tree maintenance, and really has been essential for our emergency services and everything else we've done in the past. Park tree maintenance, that new program, we're lacking without this software. So it's really exciting to finally be here.
Good timing to get the software online while this is ramping up.
Yeah, exactly.
And I suspect that since we have not had that and we've had to build workarounds and other ways, including paper binders to do our jobs for so long, I hope that we'll see some efficiencies out of it as well.
Commissioner Vandemark.
Yeah, I just have more of a question about that, for Jen, related to like, I'm assuming equivalent of I know there's a lot of services like Tree Plotter, like whatever it is, Planet Geo's offerings. I'm assuming this is akin to, right, like there's the maintenance strategy, but would this also then pull in planting? Because that's like one of the exciting things I can see, Brent. It's like exciting, right? For those, right, it would be like a tree is in the ground, and then when we plant it, like when we touch it, there's a whole backlog of that history. Is that kind of the more encompassing approach that's being planned, not just related to this? Like,
Yes, it's everything. It is Planet Geo's Tree Plotter and some we'll probably customize. But one of the other critical needs we have is implementing equitable tree canopy. We also aspire to have it do a lot of our contract-based tracking as well as monitoring, which we do on all the trees that we plant and establish routinely. And that's becoming a lot of work. And that software is ArcGIS based, as it should be, and that's helpful as well. Also, it's kind of a later phase, perhaps a little blue sky scenario, but we are looking to see if this could replace, in some ways, our permitting and regulation system, which now relies on Amanda 7. With all of the development permitting for private property changing, that really changes our framing of how we can do things permit wise and those software. And Amanda 7 has never been able to do a lot of the things we needed to do, like tell us what species of trees are impacted by this type of permit or what part of town. It is not related to GIS at this point. It's not exciting.
Thank you. Okay, looks like we used up all our time on these very interesting topics. And so we're going to move on to the equity and anti-racism lens training. We have John Tapero. Is that the right pronunciation?
Yes, thank you. I appreciate it. Don't worry, it's one of those last names where you just get used to the creativity in which it's read. So, well, thank you very much. I really appreciate the time to kind of do this quick workshop. Just give me a couple seconds. My apologies. I'm going to try to share my screen. How is that coming across to everybody?
Looks good.
Looks good.
Are you seeing? Okay, you're not seeing the thumbnails and everything, right?
We are,
Okay.
it's not slideshow.
All right, there we go. How's that?
There it is. Yep.
Okay, perfect. Awesome. Thank you. Sorry about that. I'm not too big of a tech guy, but again, thank you for the time. My name is John DePero. I'm a coordinator out of the Office of the Director. My primary roles is management of this tool. It primarily was developed as a budgetary tool, but now we are operationalizing it across the Bureau. I've been had the pleasure of working with Jen's work groups, a couple of them so far this year, the code compliance as well as the tree tech teams. I've really experienced working with your groups, and I think then we have a couple more on the docket to be up next, just because of kind of the interest that is being expressed through your work groups that you manage. So I really appreciate that support in general. I'm going to kind of whiz through these slides a little bit. A lot of them are kind of, we had a longer workshop to go around, but I just like putting this one here because it's, if you ever do a presentation, this is a fun exercise. It's your favorite cuisine plus your favorite unexpected movie. Mine, just to demonstrate it, would be Korean Wedding Singer. And it surprisingly works for pretty much any like cultural food as well as movie title. So feel free to explore that on your own time. Group agreements, this is very similar to probably everything that you've seen in attending commission meetings or committee meetings. So just pretty much just respect everybody else. I understand that you know, everybody comes from a different place, different background, different sets of values and priorities. We might all be here because we do care about the tree canopy and environmental justice, but you know, the journeys we've taken to get to this point are all can differ quite a bit. So just respecting that difference in each other. Learning objectives is basically, you know, let's figure out how to use this tool and see if we can kind of embed it into our work going forward. Kenya Williams, the former equity and inclusion manager, used to tell us all the time that, you know, this is an equity lens. However, it can be used for pretty much any aspect of your life, anything that goes on in your life, professional to the personal. So it's just a really good kind of critical thinking tool that allows you to look beyond your perceptions and kind of where you're grounded at, and kind of being willing to explore other you know, perspectives. All right. I'm not going to read through this just because it's a lot of this is in the attachment, but you know, just going over racial equity. It's whenever race does not determine access or the distribution of resources and opportunities, and that doesn't burden the system, doesn't burden essentially a specific demographic. And the Pearl is as a critical thinking approach to doing systemic racism in our systems. All right, these are the principles. I'll have a little optionality towards the end of the meeting, end of kind of my introduction. So we can definitely explore these principles more if you got, or if you had members of the commission had direct questions about it, we can explore that as well. How to apply the Pearl? Essentially as early as possible. A lot of the barriers to implementing kind of equitable considerations in any sort of like program, project, or service delivery development is kind of the constraints that planning without equitable considerations in the first kind of 25% or 20% of the project really does make it difficult to implement equitable considerations, since a lot of that framework has already been established if you kind of proceed without that. The Pearl is not a decision-making tool. So that's one of the things that a lot of people kind of get a little bit confused about, is that it's not to do something specifically. It's basically a way of thinking about the project or program or service delivery in a manner that would incorporate the perspectives are also the impacts on community members or individuals outside of your personal kind of perspective. And that the Pearl is an iterative process, meaning that it's not a one and done solution. It ideally would be applied at every kind of decision-making point along the process. I really find it useful within these workshops to kind of just do a snapshot of Portland. And this is not a reflection of this commission or any other employees that are currently employed at parks. This is a lot of this data that I'm going to be sharing is kind of a reflection of the historical values and priorities of parks from its inception. We are simply working within a system, and with the support of people like Jen and other managers, we're actively working to change the system, but this is not a reflection on current employees or this commission itself. So NPRA, I'm pretty famous in the Bureau, not famous in the Bureau, I won't say that, but I'm known in the Bureau of saying that I believe parks is a public health agency, kind of masquerading as an environmental justice one. Everything parks does, from tree canopy, rec, arts, culture, environmental justice, it all impacts community health in one manner or another. And I think that kind of looking at it from that perspective, there's a lot more optionality in regards to the data you can use to support some of the work from that more kind of fleshed out public health sphere. But also, I think it's really useful to realize that, while we are planting trees, while we are, taking care of our native plants and making sure that the invasive species are not taking over our parks, that, that is actively contributing to the health of our community in itself. Definitely economic impacts, active transportation impacts, as well as obviously climate resiliency. All right, so this is a Portland snapshot from TPL, which stands for Trust for Public Lands. It's a nationwide nonprofit that provides like yearly reports as well as mapping tools, just to kind of highlight or create snapshots of each municipality. And these are all government municipalities. I will say that kind of framing this data that you're looking at right now, this does incorporate a lot of smaller municipalities. So that does draw that total spending per capita on the nationwide averages down a bit. But even if it was to exclude a lot of the smaller municipalities and just include the ones that are similar size or larger, Portland would still be outspending the nation. And maybe there's a couple that wouldn't be, but it's on average about $50 per capita or per person, more than the national average. All right, and this is kind of from the TPL directly. This kind of points to, in my opinion, the need for consideration. Very good as a park system of doing certain things, and we're not very good at doing other things. And I think that, to me, from a personal perspective, that's kind of a reflection of the values and priorities historically that parks has had. So we're very good at dog parks. Portland is famous for love of dogs, right? So we have tons of dog parks. We have a lot of restrooms, and we also have a lot of splash pads. Oh, I'm sorry. Did somebody say something? All right, no problem. But the things that we are not very good at are kind of the basketball hoops, playgrounds, and senior rec centers. And from an equity perspective, a lot of times people think about equity in regards to specifically siloed as racial equity. The way that the equity and inclusion team, as well as parks, is kind of looking at equity is, individuals that are seniors over, usually people say 65. In speaking to like a gerontologist and some of my research at PSU, I'm kind of trying to push for the 55 age mark, because that's typically more along the lines of when you're starting to realize you might need kind of accessible components to your daily routines. And then about 75 is when kind of things start falling apart on average. Nobody in this room in particular, but that's just from a gerontologist professor. And then also for children. So children under 5 is kind of the metric that we use as a very vulnerable population for equitable considerations. So we were very good at some things, but in regards to how the work we do and the assets we develop impact kind of our vulnerable communities, we do have a little bit of work to do. But we are very good at other things as well. Um, Another portion of the TPL snapshot that I really like to highlight just because it's kind of is a good introduction into like that data exploration piece in regards to like, let's not just trust all of our systems and methods and the outputs that they produce because um, it might not be a good representation of the communities or the demographics we're trying to represent. So access score, that's kind of the service area score of who or the score of like the access of the community members within a service area. My apologies. So on citywide average, it's 85 out of 100, which is great. That is a very good score. And then when you keep on going down, you're like, oh wow, you know, low income communities, which is part of our center communities, have even a higher access score. But if you kind of dig into the data a little more, it will kind of produce, and this is directly from TPL, is that the communities of color, even though they might live in proximity or have the same service area access, they have access to 61% less park acreage. And there's a lot of external factors such as, you know, lower income individuals most likely are living in multifamily zoning, right? So the density per block is going to be substantially higher than, let's say, like a single family zoning. So a lot of those things need to be taken into consideration. But if you kind of just take a look at the distribution of our assets, and these are very rough numbers, right? The east side is about a third of the population. The west side, I apologize, the west side is about a third of the population, and then the east side is about 2/3 of the population. However, our asset distribution, this is a comment on our historical priorities because, you know, from my knowledge, you know, half of our parks haven't been built within the last, you know, 5 to 10 years. So it doesn't represent the individuals working for parks right now, but it's about 50-50 in regards to land acreage. And I might be a little off on that, but it kind of demonstrates like where we're putting our assets. And then it also compounds on that. The east, I apologize, the west side is part, while it does have a lot of multifamily zoning and there is a lot of equity considerations needed for like south of Barber as well as the end of Barber heading towards Tigard, where there are a lot of like enclaves of communities of color and low income communities. The north side of Barber is predominantly single family zoning. So you're adding park and environmental assets to zoning that already has that tree canopy as well as that green space that's associated with single family zoning. So it's just kind of the multiple layers that you kind of dig into to kind of evaluate data as well as the outputs. All right, so this is an exercise. It is very corny. I'm gonna give you a heads up on that. It's something that I like to do personally, and I'll kind of explain it at the end. But in this exercise, let's pretend we're at home by ourselves at a computer, interested in a park program, right? Let's say we're not a commission member, we're not an employee, you know, our kids have finally gone to bed, so you have that, you know, 10 minutes of time to look up parks summer programming. So when in this next slide, I would like you to kind of think about, you know, what are the attractive elements? What are the unattractive elements of the programming that you're kind of being exposed to? And how would you rank your willingness to engage in this PPNR program? And in the context of being home alone, I will have a request for silence. We're going to just review for about a minute. All right. I can never make it a minute because I am very uncomfortable in silence. That's just something that, you know, I'm gonna have to speak to my therapist about. But the only reason that I do this, and I understand, you know, thoughts going through your head of like, what the heck? You know, what is this guy doing? Why is he being such a jerk? You know, this can't be real. But this is the experience that a lot of our disability community, as well as senior population, has in their experience in engaging parks and their content either on their website or other communications. There's a there's a large need that urban forestry definitely is tackling. But this is citywide where the accessibility of our content is just not meeting the standards of kind of the Civil Rights Title II ADA. So my apologies for putting you through that, but I think it's really useful to kind of experience what other individuals are experiencing when engaging parks due to our lack of kind of accessible access or equitable access. All right. So I'll take a pause here. I'll take a deep breath. I have a couple of options. I can go through the principles themselves. If y'all, sorry, I don't mean to gender when I say guys. If you all would like a scenario to base it off of, or if you as a commission would prefer just asking questions about the principle. So I can either do a scenario-based exercise, or I can just simply answer questions, or I can do a combination of both. Is there any preference with this group, or
Combo, maybe.
our combo? Perfect. Would anybody be interested in kind of recommending a scenario? And it could be very general, maybe a project or a program or something that you guys are evaluating or working on. Maybe Brian has something. All right. No worries. What I will do
I
is,
have a recommendation there.
Oh, yeah, go
Equitable
for it.
street tree maintenance
okay, perfect.
as a possible scenario.
Yeah, sounds great. That's perfect.
You've gotten votes, if you're not seeing the chat, you've gotten votes for a scenario and then also combined approach, so.
Okay, perfect.
Sounds like
Perfect.
a
Sorry.
combined approach.
Yeah, I can't see the chat, unfortunately, when I'm in my
Yeah,
presentation mode.
yeah.
But all right, perfect. Equitable street tree. All right, so and feel free to shout out. Just due to time, I might if I'm not hearing responses, I might just kind of work through it. But I will provide an opportunity at the very beginning of each of these principles for anybody who wants to kind of shout out or raise their hand. And I apologize, Brian, if you could help me out with hands, since I can't see them. All right, so principle one, what is, oh, and I apologize. I did also send out a worksheet, and those worksheets in the green is going to be the actual principles and kind of supplementary questions. The text in black is just kind of additional prompts that might help assist generate ideas or, just jumpstart the process. All right, so with the equitable street tree planting, what is the desired equitable outcome you as a commission would like to achieve? And we can also break it up into both kind of answering first, what is the outcome you want to achieve? And then what would be the equitable considerations associated with that outcome? Or you can answer it in combination. Anybody brave enough to spit out an option?
Well, it would probably be growth of the urban tree canopy. But that the equitable component would be that it would grow more so in underserved communities so that it would be more equal across the city.
Perfect. Yeah, perfect. I couldn't have said it better, right? We want to make sure that everybody has access to the benefits of that tree canopy. So perfect. Number two, or B, how will this decision influence racial equity and center underserved communities? I think part of that was I apologize. Melinda answered part of that in that, we'll be making sure that additional tree canopy might be prioritized in specific neighborhoods or areas that those demographics reside. Would anybody else have anything else to add to that possibly in how the decisions might influence racial equity?
I think it has to be communicated what's going on.
Yes.
Because the challenge is that where the expensive street tree maintenance, not planting, but street tree maintenance is in high canopy, high income areas. Yes. Irvington, Eastmoreland, Alameda. It's expensive to do any maintenance work on those trees. So do you disregard that? And only work on, but there's not as much expensive street tree maintenance that's care of mature trees in low-income neighborhoods.
Mhm.
So if you look at the budgets that are allocated for the different places, I think there's a PR issue here. I mean, it's a challenge. Do you just kiss off street tree maintenance in Alameda, Irvington, and Eastmoreland and lose the support perhaps of the taxpayer? I'm just.
No, no,
How do you,
everything you're
Great
saying
example.
is
how do you,
wonderful.
how do you spend the money in places where there
Mhm.
aren't trees, and you spend a lot of money and you let people know you're doing it? And they still don't
No,
have shade.
perfect. No. Yeah, yeah, and I think that also you kind of hit on some of C as well, right? What are the unintended consequences of the decision? In prioritizing one group, you might be losing kind of a political base from another group, right? Are there any other unintended consequences that might um, be popping into people's heads as well? I think another thing you said, Bruce, was important is that the maintenance, right? The maintenance of the street trees can cause a burden, but sorry for jumping in. Anybody else?
Yeah, I have one other thing. It was brought up by a tree planting person for the city several years ago. That essentially it would lead to, she was worried that it would lead to gentrification, where you
Mhm.
plant a bunch of trees and you make a neighborhood different and raise the property values, and that forces the people out who are low income to begin with. So that was
Yes.
one unintended consequences of planting trees.
No, that's great. That's perfect. I actually see a hand. Justin, I apologize. For anybody else's hand I can't see, but oh, Melinda, I apologize. I just saw your hand too. Uh, Whoever was first. Sorry about that.
Oh, I just had a question. Are we
Yeah.
talking, is there scenario tree maintenance or tree planting?
Well, I think the tree planting, the unintended or the downstream impacts include the maintenance, right? You don't just plant a tree and that's the end of your budgetary responsibility, right? You're going to have to find ways to support that tree planting, either leaning on the private homeowners or parks as a bureau. So I kind of see it as one continuous thing. Just like if you were to build a park, you would have to maintain it, or create a special district to have other funding mechanisms to maintain it. So
Can
Right.
I
and
just chime in? Because when I suggested the idea, I just meant maintenance because of the funding we just got and talked
Mhm.
about earlier. So I was John, I'm trying to counter you, but we literally were just talking about getting 65 million for street tree maintenance. So it's
yeah,
specific to
yeah, yeah.
yeah. So I don't know, Justin, you can go
Okay,
another
perfect.
way, but that's what I was trying to focus on.
Yeah, that's what I was wondering because if
No
we're just
worries.
focused on maintenance, that's different than planting, which does include maintenance.
Yeah, yeah,
I
but
just want to make sure.
I think both. I think the planting influences the consequences of having to maintain, right? Like certain communities would be able to support that planting without a problem, right? Like you're saying, the Alameda and other kind of neighborhoods that Bruce, I believe Bruce had mentioned earlier. However, if you have that planting in a community that, simply is, economically not able to, have the water bill increase to water it. And then there might be, if there's no other funding mechanisms to maintain those, there can be some sort of like penal or fines associated with not taking care of those street trees. So
The PSEF
I definitely see
program,
what you guys are saying is that they're separate issues, but I see them as kind of one leading to the other, but I definitely take your point.
PSEF language is that
Uh,
tree maintenance includes planting. So I don't think
okay, perfect then.
it's inclusive.
Because you have to provide the asset before you can take care of it, right?
John,
All right.
John, if
Oh,
I
Jen,
may,
sorry about
you
that.
got it. Good for you. Especially because you don't work in the tree world all the time, but in urban forestry in Portland,
Mhm.
we talk about the life cycle of the tree. So maintenance
Mhm.
means planting,
Yeah.
young tree care, teenage tree care, mature tree care, senescence care, removal, site preparation, planting, and it starts again. And that's the way our park tree maintenance program is built and how the street tree maintenance program is planned.
No, perfect,
You
perfect.
got it.
And one thing that I like to bring up, and this is just me being maybe a rascal, and throwing a wrench into the loop, but things whenever tree planting comes around, I like, or the topic of tree planting comes up, I like to just throw this out there for just thoughts for consideration. We don't have to discuss it now, but would it be more beneficial in regards to canopy? And is there a funding mechanism which would allow us to shift our focus on planting trees in the frontages, in the right of ways, versus providing that asset to be planted in like backyards, where you would be able to, you know, sit under that tree. More likely you'd be willing to maintain it if you felt like it was encompassing your backyard. So those are just things to kick around. I know that that's higher level than what we're talking about right now, but just something to think about in regards to kind of the benefits and how we can maybe maximize the benefits of the trees we're providing.
We do both.
But
I don't know if it's a real question.
Okay, perfect.
But
Yeah.
but and
I mean,
I'll-
Yeah.
it is an interesting thought, though. I think one I haven't heard discussed about, you know, what would be more likely to increase canopy in depressed areas, in areas that haven't been served. Do we know anything
then I
about that,
believe-
or?
We do,
Oh, interesting.
private property.
Private property.
Then
There's
somebody brought it up.
limitations in right of way, they need to be redesigned. We need to have that redesign happen.
Right.
But we digress. I'm sorry.
Sorry,
No, no, no.
but it is
No,
about
that's
equity,
perfect.
so it is bringing up things, you know, when you start thinking about things in an more equitable lens, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
No, definitely. And I'm kind of vibing off of also somebody, I apologize. I'm not able to see everybody at once, but somebody had mentioned kind of the displacement and gentrification impacts of providing like an asset that is so visible, which creates like a conformity across an entire neighborhood, which then makes it more attractive. So that might also play into like, can we provide that asset and that benefit without further increasing the gentrification or displacement risks associated with that? Oh, Megan, I think I see you have a hand raised.
Yeah, well, in pertaining to this question and more, I think some of the things that we've been talking about. So within the city of Portland currently, when a tree is planted, whether, you know, in a yard potentially or along the street, right? Like one consideration is for if you're trying to benefit low income communities, do they have a yard to plant a tree in, right? Like I'm just all of the considerations of where can you get a big tree, but like who has land and who doesn't. But if
Yes.
you are, right, from just my professional background, which has been trying to convince people to plant trees for years, right? A lot of times people say no because they do not want to pay to maintain the tree, right? So when you're trying to think about removing barriers and like who then positive and negative changes resulting from it, like you can offer a tree, and currently there's more and more efforts to help do what, you know, I at least would refer to as establishment of the tree, which is watering, mulching, etc. But then in our city's model, the street tree is the responsibility of the adjacent property owner. So even if the tree is planted for free and watered for 3 years, then people walk away, and then who has to pay to maintain that tree? It is the resident. So in trying to remove barriers, if you then say, actually, the city will take on the life cycle of the maintenance, not just the initial planting and establishment, that can be a game changer, not just for residents, but like rental property owners. Where are they putting their resources? Are they putting that into, you know, a tree and then maintaining it? So like, I think life cycle maintenance, to like Jen's point, is what is going to help reduce some of these barriers.
No, I really appreciate that perspective. I think you brought up a lot of great things there. I usually tell people, I usually say this at once a meeting, is that I have a lot of ideas. However, about 70% of them are not feasible in the current capacity, scope of work, as well as kind of the way the system is built right now, which isn't to say that like they couldn't work 5 years from now, but I really appreciate any pushback whenever somebody has it, because, you know, it could be that it's not realistic in the short term. Jumping to the next slide, and this is kind of a continuation of the conversation we were just having. I want to point out that I'm jumping from principle 1 to principle 4. And that is intentional just to kind of demonstrate that these are principles. While a lot of them do fit within specific kind of areas of a project cycle, right? You're going to obviously think about your outcomes at the very first, portion of planning, determining who benefits, who's burden. That's more along lines of like the initial as well as mid planning section. So I just wanted to highlight that these can be taken out of order. Let's say if you get data up front, that is going to really dictate how you develop a program or a service. Maybe you need to tackle that one first. But I think we covered a bunch of these in that first conversation of, what are the positive, negative changes may result from the decision, right? The PSEF funding will definitely help facilitate the maintenance of that, reducing the burden. However, just having those trees in the frontages might also represent like a displacement risk, right? How would you reduce the disparities? I think we kind of went through that a little bit as well, but feel free for anybody who wants to expand on that. And then how will the decisions disrupt or reinforce systemic racism? Anybody have any things that came up for A, B, or C, but probably mainly B or C?
One of the
I know we've been talking about a lot of this.
One of the angles that was, I think, City Forester Cairo touched on this. Who does the work? Is this white male-owned companies that employ primarily white young bucks to do the work, or these small companies that are originated in Portland, owned by BIPOC members? Who is doing the work? There's certainly an economic benefit to the workers because they will be paid for doing this work in many situations, unless it's volunteers. So, yes, the community will benefit in many ways, but the workers will benefit. And who are those workers?
No, that's a great perspective. I really appreciate that, Bruce.
I think looking at C, like historically and to the present, we know that a lot of folks in these neighborhoods with low canopy also feel that the city has not invested in their neighborhoods and continues to not invest. So if it's done well, there's a potential to disrupt that by investing in those neighborhoods with the, resources of tree planting and maintenance. And I think there's also a risk of, if there's not good community engagement, it's not doing what with community, but doing for, where if it's, the tree species aren't selected with community input and what they desire, then, it's kind of like the city coming in to do something that they didn't really want. So I think that's an important consideration too.
Yeah, and I think you touched on something really important, is that maybe the desire is there to have those assets, but that distrust of that relationship with, government bodies might be just, and that might just be a knee-jerk reaction, just be like, no. And the least amount of contact I have to have, that's what I would prefer, right? So I think you really touched on something important in regards to like providing that capacity to the community to make decisions, right? And it might be like, we're all having cake today, but you get to decide, what flavor of cake we have, right? So it doesn't need to necessarily be like, what do you want in your front yards? And, the world is your oyster and everything's a possibility. But just giving people optionality, even if it is kind of constrained to the options you want them to choose, I think would produce a lot of benefit. One wild 70% idea popped into my head of like, would there possibly be any way in which to support like backyard tree? And I'm speaking primarily in the context of assuming that these are a lot of like single family home owners that are benefiting from a lot of these tree programs. Would there be any mechanism or avenue to explore where potentially the maintenance costs could be reduced if you could subsidize the water bill through the Water Bureau, with an expectation that that tree is maintained and watered? on a regular basis. Like then it would be essentially reduce the cost of maintaining, right? You're not going to have to send crews out into neighborhoods. It might take the trees off of the right of ways, which will then reduce the displacement mechanism or risk. It would place the trees potentially in the backyard that would be able to utilize that asset in more fully in regards to using that shade, as well as give the homeowner agency in regards to like who steps onto that individual's or his or her property. My apologies. But that's just a wild, eye in the sky idea. But I think it would be beneficial to explore because, maybe we could figure out like, how much it costs just pure water bill to support and maintain a tree, right? Maybe it's, the optionality of coming to pick up, like mulch and compost from a single site, right? But I mean, those are also, it might work for some people, it might not. That's just a big idea to maybe explore if you're interested. Anybody else have any other comments on this fourth principle before we move on? All right, sounds good. Unless I missed a hand. All right, engaging in internal and external stakeholders. I think you guys have already kind of explored that or mentioned that a little bit in regards to giving the community a bit of agency in regards to kind of the decision making. And then also like internal stakeholders, you're meeting with urban forestry, you're meeting with myself to kind of get an equity perspective on it. So I think we kind of answered a lot of these, but I'll just go through them again. Which underserved and impacted people would be involved in your process? How will you meaningfully engage them? And I like to point out, like, I would engage, when are those engagement points? Is it once, the project is 75% done, or are you allowing them to have kind of that contribution or access early along in the process, which doesn't mean that you necessarily need to adhere to all the whims of those community members, but like just being heard, in my experience, has eliminated a lot of like the pushback with a lot of the projects and services that I've managed in the past. And then how will your decisions build long-term relationships and trust? How would you approach or develop a relationship, or how would you proceed with this project or program with the end goal of providing the asset, but also building that relationship that is a bit fractured? Jen, did you have something? Sorry.
I did not.
Oh, no problem. I figured you might. You always have something interesting and insightful to say. So, anybody else have any kind of comments on any of these three supplemental? Oh, Justin, I think it's like your hand up. Hopefully that's a new one.
Yeah. I guess my comment is part of building that long-term relationship and trust is actually listening to the stakeholders and community members. Because if we engage with them and then they tell us what they want, and then we go and do the exact opposite because we just want to do what we want, that destroys any trust. And in the future, then they're gonna be like, well, what's the point of engaging with you if you're just not gonna listen to me?
No, that's a great point, Justin, and I really appreciate you bringing that up, because engagement with centered communities is drastically different than engagement in kind of the dominant population, right? The level of trust, the level of engagement, the level of understanding of the system, all needs to be taken into kind of consideration, right? And just in my work in the past, I really want to emphasize that like engaging community isn't just giving them whatever they want, right? Myself as a parent, I'll just use myself as an example. The way I engage my daughter about decisions is, there's one avenue or path that we're tackling right now, and I'll give her options. I'll listen to feedback. I'll give her options, but I'll also explain kind of the back end of things and saying like, we can't do this because it's going to take 2 hours to drive there, right? So this isn't kind of a reasonable expectation that this would be an option. This option, if she brings up another one, right, you'd be like, that would be great. How much allowance have you saved? right? There's a budgetary component that impacts that decision, right? And that a level of transparency with community, it really works. I don't know how else to say it, is that like if you're able to really speak to them in the manner in which you're speaking to this commission right now, or in these commission meetings and saying like, we'd love to do that. However, we need to come up with the money to do that. Like that's a great idea. However, we need these 3 projects to support, or this workforce to be built up in this manner, as well as the funding for that workforce in order to facilitate that. So I think framing, as well as being transparent about the reasons behind your decision making, really, even if you don't kind of go along the lines exactly of what they want, is still kind of a trust building mechanism, I think, in my opinion.
And just.
But you're right,
piggybacking
Justin.
on that,
Go ahead.
I think it's also important to just have that asset view of our communities that,
Mhm.
the city knows things that communities don't know, but communities know things that the city
Yes.
doesn't know. And
Exactly.
I think that having respect for the knowledge that they also know what they need and what's best for them better than the city. So, making sure that when that engagement is done, that there's a lot of respect put on the knowledge and the assets that community members bring. And it's also really tricky because no community is a monolith. So you're gonna have community,
Yeah.
of course, you'd want to engage with community-based organizations, but like they don't necessarily represent the opinions of everyone in their community. So it's just,
Yeah.
it's a really tricky process, but I think just really keeping that asset lens of like, there's knowledge here that will make this program be successful. And without this knowledge, the program will not be successful.
100%. I couldn't have said it better. I'll just bring up one example of, with the displacement of a lot of center communities in certain areas of the city, and I'm not trying to demonize anybody, because that's honestly just the natural cycle of urban development, right? Like things get disinvested in the center, build out towards the second, third rings, and then that reinvestment in the city center, and then reinvestment in the first and second ring. Um, however, oh my God. All right, I'll go to my second example. I apologize. I don't know why I'm blanking on that.
Yeah, just,
I definitely
heads
agree,
up.
because I also,
So John, we have 3 minutes left, so
oh
just
yeah,
to
sorry,
make
sorry, sorry.
sure that we
Yes,
want to
sorry.
make sure we cover everything you want, and
My
it's
apologies.
great
Yes.
discussion, yeah.
Diminish harm and develop opportunities. I think that you guys are speaking on that already with that engagement, with that intentional engagement. And the thing I was going to say is that, like, with Jen and working with her work groups, they're very technical work groups that I've been working with, and without my willingness to like learn from them, I don't think that I would be successful in the recommendations that I provided to them. But let's see, and I think we kind of covered this. In a previous conversation. Would anybody else like to touch on this or any of these supplemental questions? All right, no worries. All right, gather data. This is probably a longer conversation, but I will send out the slideshow. I do a bit of data exploration in my normal workshop. So I have like community-based data that we can explore and start using, as well as like a comparison of mapping tools. And I think Jen was in the director's budget retreats happened, where her mapping tool actually was shown to be far superior than I believe a nonprofit or another institution's mapping tool, just in regards to like the data they use to produce the scoring and the methodology associated with that. Evaluate and be accountable. I think this is the last most important one. How will you measure success and know anyone is better off? How will you track outcomes, and how will you improve the equitable outcomes of your decision or process? Anybody have any ideas on how we would be accountable and how we would evaluate whether or not our program would be a success?
We're gonna have this awesome software that will help track
Yes,
where
perfect,
the
perfect.
resources are going. So that's a great data
Yes,
source.
perfect. And I love that, the quantitative side, but I also the qualitative side that you as a commission were speaking about earlier, where we're talking about like the lived experiences and judging it based off of maybe not purely data, but that feedback we receive. But Melinda, I believe your hand's raised.
Yeah, I was just thinking, setting up systems like the new software program for institutional memory, because so much of this is so very long term.
Yeah.
I mean, mature trees take decades, years. And so being able to have the institutional memory
Mhm.
to come back and measure these things, that we have great goals, but
Yeah.
unless somebody is carrying the torch,
Mhm.
it's not going to be able to be measurable.
Perfect. I love that. In the data exploration slides that you'll find, I send them out. I do speak on the service area equity tool. It was primarily developed as an asset management, planning as well as maintenance tool. I've been handed that over, and it kind of goes into the different things that I'm exploring in making that more useful across the bureau. But Melinda, kind of speaking to your point, there's going to be a large quantitative side, but there is also going to be a qualitative side built into that, where even if the demographics that use the parks or have historically used the parks might not be represented in that service area demographic mapping, there will be a quantitative side that says, this is the anchor institution for this group or population, and they have just the same amount of rights to influence whatever decisions are being made within that park, even if they're not represented in that service area. So I really love that you bring that up. And then good.
Okay, yeah, we are at a time,
All
so.
right, perfect. Sorry. Last one, communicate, and that's primarily CE. And then a couple things I would love for you guys to kind of ponder over is, what have we learned? What are identified needs? And then next steps, what can be done to operationalize equity? I would love to start with big ideas first, things that you might not be reasonable in our current status, and then the things you would need to do to build up to accomplishing that, but also the short-term work that we can do to implement equity. But I really appreciate the time. I know I'm a couple minutes over, so I will stop talking and I will stop sharing now.
Yeah, this has been terrific, and we have many big projects that hopefully we can have you back to help apply this
Yeah, I'll be
lens
happy
to,
to.
and have more brainstorming, especially on some of those last parts. So thank you so much.
Of course, and feel free to reach out, Brian. As you probably realize, like, I'm willing to make time for y'all. So if you guys have some time and just need some either input or want to work through the process, just let me know. And I apologize. I am trying to stop sharing. All right.
That's
I
fine.
might just. All right. How do I stop sharing?
We're gonna, while you do your thing, we're gonna kind of just move to the
Oh,
next
there you go. Sorry.
part.
All right. I'm taking off. Have a good day.
Thank you
Thanks,
so
John.
much.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right, we're gonna move on to the policy committee, brief intro. Commissioner Vandermark, I believe, is gonna help us with that.
Yes.
To the overview, and then what else she'll need from us.
Excuse me, Brian, am I able to share a brief, not very great PowerPoint via my end of things? Don't want.
Yeah, you should be able to.
Okay.
And thank you again for doing this on short notice. I want to acknowledge that. Thanks.
Okay, can you all? Okay. I don't even care if you see the thumbnails. Can you all just see it?
Yeah.
Like, it's not hiding anything. Well, this relates back to our conversation maybe from 2 meetings ago, just about the policy committee. And I will 100% ask Bruce to step in. Mainly, my ultimate goal, to be transparent, is to maybe convince more of you to be engaged in the policy committee. So I more want this to be an open conversation. And I just really try to keep it brief, kind of about like, what does it look like? So in terms of this, just for the framing of the meetings, we meet it's like from 5:45 to 7:15 the Monday following this meeting. So it can vary whether it's like the 3rd Monday or 4th Monday of the month. And typically, like, I think you all are used to, sometimes we'll have a conversation and be like, hey, maybe the policy committee could we work on that? And so that's what happens. We bring those topics. If the full commission hasn't given us directions, so to speak, we will often try to talk about priority conversations that we can identify. Currently, with Roberta's departure, it is Bruce and myself. I want to say Bruce is a much more thorough and engaged policy committee member than I am. And then typically what we do, it's look different based on who the chair of the policy committee is, which in this situation would be Bruce. And before Bruce and Roberta, it was Daniel, is we often just co-work an approach together. So, this might be, or, like maybe you all have asked around like street tree maintenance. And what we try to do is take what we heard from everybody in the commission and then like talk it through. And maybe what we're gonna do is put together a letter that's gonna go to city council. So we kind of co-work what those points should be. I will be very honest, this is what intimidated me at first. The idea of writing a letter to city council was terrifying. And so I just want to always let folks know, like, we do it all together and try to really come up with the salient points would be. There are kind of community members that will come and attend because it is open to the public. But it is always, urban forestry commissioners that are moving these efforts. And then normally we'll say, who wants to lead on drafting the letter? That is typically in the past been like the chairs. So Bruce and Roberta have done a lot of that heavy lifting. But then they'll share it like right now, Bruce and I would share it, and then I'll give edits and commentary. And we really do try to support each other. And then we bring it back to all of you, particularly if it's a letter that needs to be approved by you all. So it's not as exciting it is. I'm trying to at least let people know it is a very co-worked process, in case policy feels a little intimidating. On this is a little dense, apologies. But I went through our current urban forestry management plan, which we are in the process of updating, but kind of pulled out like what are the aspects of it that kind of relate to like the role of the policy committee. And that's just, like the way that we typically weigh in those spaces during these meetings is, we review and provide input on plans and policies and projects, right? Which contain to the urban forest, and of course, proposed amendments to, to Title 11, and also things related to budget. That's normally what we're talking about. And what I pulled up are this is a lot of words, but I looked over like, what are the last few years, what we've really worked on as a committee. And it has been, a lot of it relates to Title 11 amendments and proposing amendments when there's opportunities. A big thing that feels like a victory, even if not the full victory we were hoping for, but is street tree maintenance. That is a lot of where our efforts have been. Y'all, that might mean when the policy committee will give testimony, like someone will give testimony or will work on testimony that, maybe like the chairs will give or something. So a lot of effort has been around advocating, for street tree maintenance, but we've done other things, some that feel maybe a little, for lack of a better word, wonky than others. But oftentimes if a bureau comes and presents, we will then work on, helping draft some recommendations for what we'd like to see. And we do try to speak to what we liked and what we would like to see within the course of letters. They are typically 1 to maybe 4 pages. But we've done a lot of this for the pedestrian design guide, right? Which is setting standards that relate to, in some ways, like sidewalks, and then how that's going to impact trees. We will kind of sometimes get tasked with writing, the support letter, so to speak, for parks budget, or for like levy funds and how they may be allocated to parks. A lot of different types of letters to city council around things from like PSAF, the residential infill project, tree canopy, that was the state of the urban forest. And then we do some things that may feel a little more detailed, like recommendations related to water meters and technical standards. But hey, if you all really want to get to know city planning, that's an exciting opportunity. And also, you know, the climate emergency work plan for the city and how it relates for trees and really continuing to keep that front and center, but also, you know, relating to recommendations. I think, you know, the Housing Production Advisory Committee, this was the state effort where we made a recommendation to the city. So the city would hopefully make, you know, inform their recommendations to the state based on what we do. So these are just some examples. And I can tell you all, if you want copies of what we've done to see what letters look like, we have all of them. So you could use templates to move forward. And then this is so hard to read, but I was trying to show just a snippet. Is oftentimes in the letters, what we do is we will, you know, there's lots of openings and trying to set a tone, thank them for what we like, you know, talk about, like, elevate what we liked, but then also talk about, you know, like solutions or recommendations, right? And a lot of it is just saying things we've all talked about in bullets and then any supporting arguments to it. And then you all kind of sign off on it. That's like a really rough and ready version. It is, I will want to bring Bruce or Brian in. Did I stop sharing? Nope, stop sharing. But that's kind of the bones of it. It's not, I mean, policy isn't like, I mean, maybe it's really fun. I don't know, Bruce. But like, it feels really important. So I'm just trying to bring you all along into how important and how much you can learn about writing letters to city council or giving testimony. But Bruce, what would you add in as I try to sway these people, hopefully? You're muted.
So a lot of times, city actions are based on some sort of guidelines or code language that they have. And city employees that's what they're supposed to follow. And so it's important that when we have the opportunity to change language in some of those documents, that to make it more tree friendly, that we weigh in. Because it isn't always true that people who work for the Water Bureau maybe are not as knowledgeable about tree needs as we would like them to be. So if we can get in when these documents or the code changes are in the process, that's a really good start. Then you're not fighting from behind, more or less. And I think I haven't I believe it's within the last 10 years or so, it is more common for city bureaus to bring these policy documents to the Urban Forestry Commission. I don't think that was necessarily the case. I know it wasn't the case in the early 90s. There was nothing like that. So we're kind of at the table, and certainly much more than we were years ago. So it's important that the input that we give be considered, astute, and timely. And it's hard within the Urban Forestry Commission meeting timeframe to have the discussions that are sometimes necessary on these matters. You know, we get started and we get guidance, but the policy committee, it's a small group. It's not a heavy agenda. I mean, there are not a lot of different items. So there's a time for more in-depth discussion and exploration. So that's what I value about it. Sometimes we initiate issues to bring to the Urban Forestry Commission, and sometimes we've been given direction by the Urban Forestry Commission, and then we write the letter, it goes to the chair, they review it, and then send it on to whomever it's appropriate for. So, and historically, there have been different members of the community who weren't Urban Forestry Commission members who regularly attended. That's still the case, but the number of people coming to meetings is not very many right now. It's very small. So that's I think it's an opportunity for discussion and to probably help us craft the language that we want to see in these different numerous planning documents that come our way.
Thanks so much for the presentation. That's actually a great overview, and it's actually very impressive what we've done, what you've done with this group. So thanks to the two of you and everyone else that's participated in it. And it sounds like the big ask is for more participation and, really encourage people to get involved in this because it does get into the weeds. So there's a lot more opportunity for learning, but it's also really highly relates to our effectiveness as an advisory group. It seems like with the change of government, we want to be doing a lot more in terms of cultivating relationships, doing feedback, doing, written or testimony. So it's really a challenge to all of us of, how can we do that better? So what would be most helpful? We're sort of semi out of time, for this, but a few more minutes. What would be helpful right now? I see we have a related agenda item that might have some overlap with the policy committee bylaws.
Yeah, we could actually pick this back up at the end of the meeting because we have the bylaws on the policy committee.
Okay.
So we can come back to that then, actually.
Okay,
Yeah.
so do we have our guests for the next?
Yes,
Okay,
right here.
great.
We're plus
So
two
why
right
don't
now.
we stay on time? Does that sound good, guys? And we'll move to the next agenda item, which is introductions of the vibrant community new leadership. And then we'll wrap around to kind of finishing this topic and defining next steps after that. Welcome.
Well, thank you.
Hi.
Thank you, Chair Holstein. I want to welcome to the commission meeting today and personally our relatively new Vibrant Communities Deputy City Administrator, Sonia Szymanski. Hello, Sonia, welcome. And her Chief of Staff, Kelly Torres. Hello.
Hello.
And they're here to meet you all today and also talk a little bit about vibrant communities and their roles, since that's part of the new city structure. With that said, I'll turn it over to you folks, if that's okay.
Yeah. I'll go first. I've been noticing it takes me about 10 minutes to get through my introduction, and that's too many for this meeting. So I'm gonna be real brief, but if there are questions, I'd love to take them. And I would love to hear a little bit more if we have time about the latest and greatest with this group before we head out for today. I'm Sonia Szymanski. As Jen said, I am the new Deputy City Administrator for the Vibrant Communities Service Area. It's a new position. I'm new in it. It's a new role. Service areas are new. Everything is new. It's, what a time to be alive. It's really wonderful. I am not new to the city. I've been here 15 years. I worked most of that time for Nick Fish, who was a council member for 12 years. He died in 2020, after which I moved up to the mayor's office and I worked there till the middle of 2021. And then I thought the bureaucracy sounded pretty nice. So I came across the street and built a program to help city project teams deliver rescue plan grant funded projects. Then I went downstairs and joined the CAO's office as Deputy Chief Administrative Officer for Mike Jordan, our CAO. And then since April, I've been in this role. In my previous role, the transition team was part of my portfolio. So I have been in the engine room of the building of this new structure. And then to kind of pop out and get to be part of not building the idea, but building it actually and implementing it and getting it ready to welcome 2025 is such a thrill. And including because when I worked for Nick Fish, we had the Parks Bureau in our portfolio for about 5 years. And we were very proud that we hired Director Long, and to come back to that work and see what has evolved and grown and matured and strengthened since I was last really in it with people is such a wonderful affirmation of that leadership. And really a treat to see, and then to get to think I get to be part of the next chapter of moving it even further along is so wonderful. Our service area is a dream. We are Portland Parks and Recreation. We are a new central services team, the Vibrant Community Support Services Group. We are the Children's Levy, and we are the very new Office of Arts and Culture. And we are unique among service areas in the community connection that we create and curate and care for and foster. And are active participants in. Other service areas are as important. It's not about importance, but the way that we touch community and engage community is unique. And I'm so proud of that, and that we get to be together and learn from each other. We have a lot of partners in common. We have priorities and work in common. So to figure out how to make the most of all of that is really exciting. The work ahead is about building service areas. What is a service area? What is our service area? How does it work? Who are we now? And then being ready for a new mayor and new council in 2025 to come and kind of layer on top of that a vision for the city. The role of DCA is accountable for alignment with that citywide North Star and citywide priorities, and as a group for coordinating with each other and making sure that the whole entire operation is answerable to that one vision, where before we've had 5. Now, fingers crossed, we'll have 1 and we'll be ready to implement it really effectively. Quick update you probably have, but I'm just so delighted about it. Yesterday in the approved budget hearing, council had some conversation that relates to your work, and it ended well. I'm so grateful to the budget and finance folks in our support services team for surfacing complexity and a trade-off related to the mayor proposing to swap PSEF funds for general funds for the urban forestry program. It's not the most complicated thing that's ever happened, but it's a lot to get your head around when you've got a whole entire budget to consider. But they surfaced it, and Commissioner Ryan brought forward a policy discussion about how to solve for it. And it ended in a really good kind of fiscally responsible place where we've memorialized a commitment that those PSEF dollars will inflate as general fund does. So it's a commitment to stabilizing that funding. Otherwise, it's a cut over time, and that's not going to happen. And I'm just so proud of the team and the commissioner and council for recognizing that and ending in that place. So that was really a treat to be part of. See, it just suddenly is 10 minutes. So that's me. I'm so happy to be here. I'm so grateful for your work and Jen's leadership. And I got to spend time embedded at 1900 with the team a couple weeks ago. I'll be out at Delta Park next week, and it makes it real to do those visits. And it's just been really wonderful. Is that cool for now?
That's awesome.
Okay.
Sure, I will just add that I am Kelly Torres. I am Sonia's chief of staff, and I want to add to the continuity because I feel like that's the theme, that there's a lot of history and a lot of context already built into us coming in here. I've worked with parks for nearly 12 years. I've worked with Jen, I've worked with Adina, I've worked with Todd, I've worked with Claudio, Sonia, so there's just continuity. So I feel like if I were you, I would want you to know that we're not starting from scratch with understanding the complexities or the priorities. And I hope that gives you comfort. There should be no major shakeups or changes that you experience with this new transition. Just people who are really enthusiastic about being here.
And you may have questions about what it means for this group. If you do, I'm happy to hear them. There aren't a lot of answers, but I can share what I know, which is very little, if there are questions. Or if there's no time, there's no time, and we can take questions later.
There's time.
Yeah, as they come.
Yes, and it looks like we have one hand up, Commissioner Nelson.
My question, I didn't understand the memorializing the 7 million, let's see, 7 million annually that's going to urban forestry that's coming from PSEF. I got confused with the Oregonian article, inflation. What does that mean? That the city
Yeah.
will consider it every year? I just was baffled by the text.
Council was a little baffled too. I'll try again, and thank you for that. Programs that are funded with general fund automatically are indexed to inflation and the amount goes up every year. PSEF is different. PSEF is just this amount this year, same amount next year, same amount year after, and there's no guarantee that it will inflate to cover rising costs in the same way that general fund does. So what that means is it's a cut next year because your buying power is going down. We walked council through that, and where they ended was with a budget note, which is not a fiscal action, but it's policy direction in the budget that said we will inflate the PSEF dollars in the same way general fund dollars get inflated each year. And it directed staff to work together to figure out what those numbers are gonna be. But what it was a commitment that it will be a true swap. And it will not be a declining resource over time, which is, that's dramatic starting 1 year from now, if it's not rising with inflation. So that they confirmed that as their policy direction yesterday, and they told our budget office to work with receiving programs to get the numbers ready ahead of next year's budget.
Any other thoughts, questions? I had one actually, and that is, so what is your insight? It's likely advisory committees will be changed, everything's changing. So any insight so far into that? And also related to that, how would you like to best communicate with us and stay in touch?
The question about advisory bodies is not very far along. It is identified as a question, but it's nowhere near answered. There are some types of bodies where it's more clear. For example, budget advisory committees, they have a very prescribed role in the budget process. So we'll be thinking about them in a certain category. Committees that don't advise the city, but that the city participates in, where electeds sit on them, but electeds are changing. And the scope of being an elected this year is different than next year. Maybe a DCA sits on that, maybe a director, maybe somebody else, maybe nobody. Bodies that advise bureaus or council members are so different, and they're so unique in who they advise about what and how, that they really need to be looked at. I'm concluding one at a time. One important question to start with is, who do you advise? And is that still the right person or position or part of the organization? If you're advising council because they are the executives in charge of the functions you care about, they won't be next year. If you're advising a director, their role may be changing. If you're advising civic life or OMF, they don't exist really going forward. So we need to figure out where are you appointed, about what, and to what end. And then if we need to reroute to a different role, we'll do that. But again, they're so different that I think they need really individual exploration. And it's unclear who will do that because we have a couple hundred of them. The transition team, which is small and mighty and central, is figuring out how to go about it. They're probably not the team that's going to be digging in and making recommendations. They might be. Or they might say to the DCAs, you please go figure it out for your service area based on the following guiding principles or something like that. So I hope you hear as I'm talking, that's many steps and they're not starting right now. So nothing will change right away. And if there are particular things that we need to look at right away for practical reasons, we certainly can. Otherwise, that's a little further down the road. As to how we stay connected, I'd love to hear what you think as a starting place.
Commissioners. Staying connected to the service area director.
I have an idea, and it would just be that you reach out and ask if there's something that you don't understand or that there's something you want guidance on. For instance, we're moving forward with PSEF funding, and there's a lot of questions through PSEF and through this group, as well as urban forestry in the strict sense of how to spend that money, where best to do it, what to prioritize. And you have a lot underneath your jurisdiction now. So like you noted, it's all very complicated. Portland Parks and Recreation does a lot of stuff. On one side, it's a technical group that does tree removals and planting. On the other side, it makes sure that kids are outside learning and looking at trees and bugs and things. So having you be confident that you can come to us, I think is something that I would like to encourage you to do. So if you have something you're like, where should we go? What should we do? Please just send an email and then we will be able to have that discussion here and provide good guidance. So that's one way I would love to interact with you.
Yeah, I appreciate that and I love that and I will do that. Thank you. And of course, updates that would help for us
The
to
other
know
way.
the bigger context,
Yeah.
like what's going on at the city level that then trickles down to urban forestry that we should be aware of. One of the things that where we struggle, and it's largely structural and a little bit cultural and as a practice is our decision making is it's not predictable. Who decides and how quickly and based on what here, and it's kind of anybody's guess when you launch how you're gonna get to the end. So it can be hard to know when to come and ask and what to ask or what to share, because you don't know what kind of process you're feeding with the input. I have a hope that we become more predictable in that way and that we can be more meaningfully connected and predictably connected along the way. So to those points, yes, it can be hard to know, but I am absolutely watching for those things and trying to be part of creating a new way of doing things.
De-siloing.
Yes,
Sounds good.
that's our job. That's my job. And I know you have a lot of stuff, so.
Thank you so much for
These are
coming. and
Yeah,
we're
thanks for the
excited
time.
and look forward to having you back,
Mhm.
periodically, so.
There's so much happening here. So much big stuff.
Thanks for your work.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Ivory. And we didn't get to do introductions the other way, but maybe we'll catch that at an upcoming meeting. Thank you all. Thank you very much. Okay, happy sunny Thursday. You should have these meetings outside. I know.
Talked about that.
That would be nice. Okay, if we could get Zoom.
Yeah.
Car blocks or something.
Circling back to policy committee bylaws review and adoption, and any open items from the first piece.
Yeah, I think I'll give a few minutes back to Megan and Bruce, just if there's anything else. Just in terms of the overview or questions, and then maybe we can get to the bylaws in the last few minutes here.
Bruce, are you trying to talk? I can't tell. But what I would just say is, if anything, if anyone's intimidated or not, or but even semi considering maybe waveringly interested, I would love for folks to just come to the policy committee just to see and like join. Like that doesn't mean a commitment, but I think like kind of coming and joining, and even if it's intermittent, I think sometimes it's sometimes there can be a high volume at one time, and I think I'm very aware that I have a job that takes a lot of my time. And so I feel like I want to make certain Bruce is supported because he's been doing a lot of this heavy lifting. And so even sometimes having support with generating how we want to write a letter, like even if folks can't dig deep, but they could come and be a contributor, help us make certain we're reflecting what we've talked about. But to start even coming to one, just be like, what is this like? Open invitation and not a pressure to have to be an ongoing member, but I kind of want to be like, come and see what it's like when you can, is a great kind of initial way to learn more.
And if someone's interested in attending or even joining, to email one of the two of you. Brian, sure, could pass it on as well.
Yep.
Commissioner Bechtold.
Hello, everyone. I just wanted to share with Commissioners Megan and Bruce that while I don't really have the capacity to fully engage with the committee, I am always open to helping to draft or to edit So please ping me whenever you need. I will pay attention to when the meeting invites and things come and attend as I can, but I'm always happy to help with some of those tasks. So if you have a specific task that you need assistance with, please reach out to me and I'm happy to do it. Thank you.
That's great. That really is great. Because I know my writing sometimes gets much better with editing.
We could all use help.
Yeah. And also, if folks are ever, like if you just decide to come last minute, like you could let Brian and Bruce know, but the meetings are publicly posted. So if you literally Google Urban Forestry Commission Policy Committee, like it'll come up and, because it is open to the public. So let's say it is 5:30 this upcoming Monday and you're wondering, they mentioned that, I'd love to come. You can just always happen to keep a lower pressure point of entry.
So Brian, let's move on to the bylaws. If any people want to know anything, email Brian, or if you have Megan or my email, just email us directly because we'd love to have you there. But I'm hoping we can get the bylaws passed. There's a requirement that subcommittees actually have existing bylaws. That doesn't always happen. There are a number of subcommittees within the city that probably don't have bylaws. So just this little piece of red tape was trying to get taken care of. We discussed it in the subcommittee for probably, we started last summer. There have been numerous drafts, met with Brian. There have been other revisions. And so what you got before you is the culmination of all those activities. We want something short, something that people can refer to, and so we're legal. And that's what it's intended for. The city guidelines are that only city appointed people can vote on the decision. So in our case, they would have to be Urban Forestry Commission members. We want people who aren't members of the Urban Forestry Commission to participate, but if there's ever a vote, it will be only the Urban Forestry Commission members that will vote on it. But I think I could say we will take into account what others say who are participating. Let's see, I think it's fairly dry, I hope. So we're calling for no more than 5 UFC members. And the reason for that is if you have more than 5, then let's see, and if there's a decision, then anyway, there needs to be notification ahead of time that there's going to be a decision. So that number's not arbitrary. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, and if there are 6 commissioners, it's technically a meeting of the Urban Forestry Commission because you have a quorum of the UFC. So we're trying to keep this to be a subcommittee of the full commission.
Now, it is true that the Urban Forestry Policy Subcommittee has operated for many years without bylaws, but there's no need to continue that particular practice. So we're trying to take care of that.
Yeah, and this is mostly stemming from the UFC adopted new bylaws a year or 2 ago, following direction from the city to have really bring all of the city advisory committees and commissions into alignment on what their bylaws look like. And so this was sort of a necessary step under the new bylaws to adopt formal rules for what our how our subcommittees work.
Justin, Justin.
Oh, sorry, what'd you say, Bruce?
I saw your hand raised. Do you have a question or a comment?
Oh, no, sorry, I didn't mean to raise my hand.
Okay.
But I do have to go right now, but I looked at the bylaws and they look good to me.
Okay.
I just wanted to put that out there.
If we have to vote to approve, can we like retroactively count Justin's vote for?
One, two, three,
I
four.
feel like that's fair at this point.
Cool. I do vote to approve them when that time comes. Thank you.
Okay,
Thanks,
thank you,
Justin.
Thank you. Thank you.
Jen, do you have a question or is my computer acting up?
Yeah, I think you're seeing hands that aren't there.
Oh, yeah,
Seeing hands.
that's right. Okay. All right.
Might be a mouse, yeah.
Okay, I got rid of it. How about I move that we approve the draft bylaws for the UFC Policy Committee?
Second. All in favor? All opposed? Any abstentions?
Didn't hear where it was. I said I didn't hear what we're voting.
Oh, we're voting, sorry about that. We're voting on the bylaws for the policy committee. I don't know if we had a chance to read them.
I did, yes, so actually I would be in favor.
In favor, okay,
Thanks.
we have another favor vote, great.
All right, thank you, everyone. Yeah, we got a few minutes left. I don't know if anyone else,
Okay,
anything else
yeah.
you want to talk about?
I honestly, I did have a question about the role for outside community members on the group, especially when we have a shortage of workers. I know that we're supposed to have commission members only vote on within the advisory committee. So I'm just curious, Commissioner Nelson Vandermark, your experience with that and thoughts and the way you want to go with that in the future?
I would honestly like to have participation from community members because I think it's a good way, a comfortable way to begin to get familiar with some urban forestry activities and would be good training for potential future members of UFC. And I also think since it's just discussion format, I think it can be much more comfortable for many people. So I would like to ask different members of the community to come and make presentations to the policy committee on different topics. I think that could be done within the policy committee. And that may be a way to draw in more people to participate.
Megan?
Yeah, and I would only just add, like, today, in addition to voting, like, if there's ever anything that we're drafting, like, it is only, like, there's discussion to Bruce's point, but like, in terms of drafting letters, drafting testimony, giving testimony, that is not something that we have non-urban forestry commission members do. So that's kind of, and that's, I mean, to be honest, that's just kind of the bulky work part of it.
Yeah.
Is the part, it's actually why Darrell's offer is wonderful, because sometimes it's just that time. And I think we've tried to be mindful of being able to have discussion with community members, but realizing the work kind of portion, the voting portion is for urban forestry commission members, at least to date. That has been how we've approached it.
Good clarification. Well, good. Any other thoughts about this, folks?
I had a question about, because we do have vacancy on the commission and when has that already been posted or is that coming soon?
Yes, it is posted right now. So I'm not sure if we've gotten any applicants yet. It runs through late August. So we put it into tree bark and doing other kind of promotions out there, but I will email the posting to everyone. So please do
Yeah.
spread it amongst any networks you're connected with. Very excited to get that position filled.
Commissioner Lilly put a comment in the chat.
Okay, thank you.
Announcement, Neighborhood Tree Steward Program has open applications. They're due June 6th, and he would encourage folks to apply and ask folks to. You're here.
Great.
Cute. Okay, well, it looks like we're ready to wrap up 1 minute early. Good to see you all.
Everyone.
See
Thank
you
you
again
all.
soon.
Thanks, everyone.
Take
See ya.
care.